Yesterday I uploaded a video showing how to make a simple sweater for 15 to 18 inch dolls using 4 squares woven on a Nellie Bee Weaving Loom. Now that's a vintage potholder loom. Most of the potholder looms should be about the same. I used worsted weight yarn, Red Heart Super Saver, and they should all make a 6-inch square. Now, what I'm going to do today is show you that you can take that same pattern of the video that I uploaded yesterday to make a sweater, and you can then replace the woven squares if you want with any fabric. I have a 6.5 inch template, quilting template, and I'm just going to use the machine here for a second. Now that is a woven square on the Nellie Bee loom, and it's a little bit out of shape, but it's just out of shape, it's not incorrect. And you can see that it is right now on 2 sides is about 5.5 inches, because there's almost a 1/2 inch on each side. But the other way it is longer, but that is because of the way the loops are. But anyway, if you have a 6.5 inch template, quilting template, you can cut out any fabric and make the same sweater cardigan as we did with the woven squares. Now, this is the second white sweater that was in the video from yesterday, and I haven't put it together yet. And you'll see that instead of my model 1588, I have set up one of my Singer model 237s. Now, I've done this for a couple of reasons. This machine, I believe, only goes up to 20 stitches per inch instead of 30. The Spartan and the 1588 go up to 30. So I'm going to try 2 things today. I am going to try stitching this woven square together as a sweater with a stitch length of 20 per inch. I think the average on most machines is going to be closer to 20 than 30. So I'm going to do the same thing I did with the sweater pattern yesterday, putting it together by hand, but I'm going to use a machine with a maximum stitch length of 20 per inch to see if it falls apart after I sew it together. That's one thing. Now the other thing I'm going to do, and I have to move around some boxes here. Now this is, I've been using this piece as a table runner. It's a garter stitch knit table runner. You know, I just picked up the needles and was knitting, and it became a table runner. Now I can take a 6.5 inch template. You can make them out of cardboard if you don't want to buy a quilting one. I can mark on this knitted fabric, and you want to keep the garter stitch rows straight with the grids, or at least straight to your cardboard. I can mark around this with chalkboard chalk, and before I cut the fabric, I can go around the 4 sides of each square on the chalk mark with stay stitching. And what that will do will give me 4 garter stitch knit squares that I can use the same way I used the woven squares in the pattern from yesterday of making the sweater for a 15 inch to 18 inch doll. In other words, you can take the simple weaving loom fabrics And like I said, replace them with anything. Now this is garter stitch. You could make 6.5-inch squares out of fabric and quilt them and sew the sweater pieces together. 4 woven squares become all you need for a pattern piece to then make a sweater type top for a 15 to 18-inch doll out of anything. So I have some things to do this morning, but later today I hope to both mark these and stay stitch around them. I think I have enough to get 4 squares, but I'm not sure. I may not have enough, because if I put that, I may not have enough of this fabric. 1, 2, 3. Oh, I should. I'll just have enough. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll just have enough to get 4 squares out of this. Now, another thing you can do is, this is a sweater that was my mother's, and I'm not going to do it to this one. But if you do have an old sweater that it's time for it to go, you can upscale sweaters. Here's a piece of woven cotton, woven on a Untitled loom. You can do the same thing. Here's one of my mother's aprons. That's, you know, you could even cut your squares out to use the banding on the front on the cardigan. So it opens up an awful lot of ideas, and it's a good place to start. I have several commercial patterns for clothes for dolls, from bitty babies, 8-inch dolls. I have Barbies. I have so many vintage Barbie patterns, and I've sewn a lot of clothes for all of them. But at the same time, the simplicity of using 4 squares to make a top actually leads to, you can make your own sweater that way. If you did measurements of how long of a square you needed, you could, like that woven cotton fabric I could weave a couple of strips of that and then cut it into 4 squares to fit me and make a cotton sweater that way. In other words, you don't have to know how to knit or weave to use fabric that is knit or woven. You can go to the thrift shop and buy old sweaters. You can resize or repurpose sweatshirts. So what we're really doing is we're taking 4 squares, in this case 6.5 inches, and using that basic pattern that I showed in the video yesterday to open up a whole world of possibilities for making either a doll or yourself a cardigan. So today, like I said, I plan on using this machine. Now, the 1588, I did say that I'm going to keep that with me. It's a hand crank. It does everything. It's a wonderful machine. At the same time, usually for my knits, I go to this machine. So I have more than one machine to choose from right now. I don't know. I'm going to see how this goes. The 15, when I was sewing the woven squares yesterday and putting seam tape on them, the 15 went right through them without a problem. So I want to see if this does the same thing. Now this is a zigzag machine. If you don't want to buy a new imported machine, I have a new brother, and I almost got that one out to do this with. But if you don't want a new imported machine, if you want a vintage machine, really the 237 It's from 1968 to 1972. It's all metal. The top is plastic, but the rest of it is all metal. It has 3 needle positions, 1, 2, 3, 4 zigzag positions, and different stitch lengths, but and straight stitch. But that's all it does, is straight stitch and zigzag. And if you don't like the vintage machines with, like the 15 needs a zigzag attachment, and the vintage zigzag attachments move the fabric back and forth, whereas a machine like this or a newer modern one would move the needle back and forth. So there are a couple of differences there as to what you can do with the machine. But this is like a standard basic good old-fashioned Singer, and it's got zigzag. So if I can excuse me, if I can stitch this sweater together today like that without using like a muslin, I often use muslin as like an interfacing, just a tighter woven fabric to hold things together. But I'm going to see this is the general purpose foot, which is also the zigzag foot, and the toes go up a little bit. So if I can stitch this at 20 stitches per inch and have it hold together, then that is a faster way to make a sweater. Now the reason I would move to hand knit fabrics, because you can knit this anywhere. I think I put 40 stitches on there on size 9 needles, bulky weight fabric, bulky weight yarn. I held 2 strands together of worsted and just kept knitting. So, you know, with me it ended up a table runner, but I have a few of them. So now I can make a sweater for the 15-inch doll. And what this is giving me practice if I needed it, or giving you practice if you need it, on making your own clothes this way. It's kind of the same theory that Singer had behind the Model 20 in their high-end set. They included a wooden mannequin doll. I think they were wood, and you could make clothes for the doll, and what that taught you was to make clothes for yourself. And this is kind of the same thing, only what we're using are simple squares. And there are commercial patterns where all you do is cut out rectangles or squares and make your own clothes. But with me, what I would like to do is combine it with either woven fabric or knitted fabric. So sweaters, blankets, any old fabric can be upscaled into doll clothes. And it keeps you thinking, it keeps you designing, it keeps you expanding in what you know how to do for yourself. If you have more than one machine, it's a wonderful way to use all your machines so they stay in working order. So the first thing I'm going to try a little bit later this morning is stitching this sweater for a 15-inch Bitty Baby doll on this machine, and we'll see how it goes. If you do look for a Model 237, again they're from 1968 to 1970. There are a couple of different styles and colors, but they're basically all a 237. Some of them have feed dogs that drop, and some of them don't. And I'm not sure which came first. I have one of each of the models. This one has a knob here that drops the feed dogs. And they're a Class 15 Singer, which means they take all Class 15 bobbins. They're really a nice machine. So I will set that up, and the first thing we'll do is sew that woven square sweater from yesterday, this white one, and see how that comes out with machine stitching. Now before I start what I'm doing today, I want to show you 3 different ways that the fabric has come out on the Nellie Bee Weaving Loom. This is Fisherman Wool by Lion Brand, which is a light worsted weight, single strand, and it definitely is heavy enough for a doll sweater. It's also good for a baby shawl or a very lightweight sweater for an adult. This is the same yarn, only what I did was chain the yarn first. And this is wonderful fabric. It's almost as thick as a pot holder. It's thick enough to use it as a pot holder. It took a lot of yarn. It took a full ounce. I thought it had been half an ounce, and luckily I started with an ounce, and I do have some left over, but it took closer to an ounce after chaining it, and I chained it with a G hook. And I mean, this would make, if you used squares like this to make a sweater like we're making, it would almost look like a little, a really nice little sweater for the dolls. And then this is the super bulky weight after being loosely lucided. And the reason it looks like this and not even, it's not an even weave, when I wove it, I warped it one direction, and then when I wove the blue in, I only went over 1 strand at a time instead of 2, which left the brown, which was my first warping, more prominent than the blue. But very difficult to work with on the Nellie Bee Weaving Loom, because you end up with 4 strands per stitch, and it just takes longer because you have to make sure your hook doesn't get caught up on any of the strands. But there are 3. The one that I haven't finished yet is tightly lucided cord, which is then woven on the Nellie Bee Loom. So far, for doll clothes, the regular worsted weight is fine. And I've been using Red Heart Super Saver acrylic worsted weight. For people, well, personally, if I were going to make a sweater this way, I would want at least this weight. Otherwise, it's just such a lightweight, almost a summer sweater. The problem is, it takes so much yarn. So, I mean, it took an ounce. This comes in 8-ounce skeins. I would only get 8 squares per 8-ounce skein, and those are, a good price is $10.99 at Amazon. They can run $12.99 and up. So that's expensive for 8 squares. And if I were making an adult sweater, so you'd only need 4 ounces for a doll sweater. But if I were making an adult sweater and only getting 8 squares per large skein, then I'm trying to think, I'd need at least 1, 2, 3, 4, like 7 skeins at least to make an adult size sweater. And at $10, that makes it a $70 sweater. Still doable. When I knit my bulky knit sweaters, the yarn alone costs me about $75. So it would be about the same, actually, to make a sweater this way with squares. But you'd have to plan on buying 7 or 8 large skeins of Fisherman Wool from Lion Brand. If you used scrap yarns, you would need an ounce per square, and at worsted weight, and then chain it all and then weave it on the Nellie Bee loom. So, but the sweater we're working on today is the acrylic. This is the wool, and this is the Super Saver by Red Heart acrylic worsted. It's a nice. I have to say, it's a nice yarn. I'm making a pair of socks out of it right now also. So it's soft enough for people to wear. It's not like some craft yarns or Super Saver yarns are so stiff that they're really better for rugs. Like, I'm thinking of Aunt Lydia's rug yarn. It's so stiff and so plastic looking that you really couldn't use it on anything but a rug. And I was afraid the Super Saver yarn would be like that, but it isn't. It's very soft. Okay, now what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to go over the seam tape again that I've already added to this piece. And you really should watch the video that I uploaded yesterday regarding the Nellie Bee woven sweater for a 15-inch doll. And I have a briefcase in the way, so just get that set. Now I'm going to go over this with the narrowest zigzag stitch. Now the whole point is to use as tight a stitch length as possible. So let's just go ahead and do this. For some reason this is tightening up. I'm checking to make sure my needle isn't broken or something. It just doesn't want to go down. Now, oftentimes when you're at the end or the edge, you will have to shift it. Because what happens is it's a little bit loose on the feed dogs, and it doesn't go through easily. Now I go past the edge and then back up again. And it's getting stuck on the seam tape. But I do that to make sure that I've gotten every, excuse me, every strand of yarn at the end and at the beginning. So now I'll do that to the second one, and this is, it was already fine the way it was, but I'm just adding a second set of stitches on there. After that, I'm going to cut it up the middle in between the two pieces of seam tape. Now, sometimes you can force it, like I was just trying to, but you run the risk of getting loops caught in the feed dogs. Okay. Now I had mentioned that you could use muslin as like a stabilizer when you sew this. There's something else you can use is wax paper, and I think I'm going to go ahead and use wax paper today. But what I'm going to be doing now, I'm cutting it in between, and this is going to give me 2 front pieces to a cardigan. And that's why it's important to make sure that you've gathered or stitched through all those edges at the upper and lower end, because this is going to become fringed. Those just come off of there and it's fringed. Now the side that has the seam tape showing is the wrong side, and when you're hand sewing them together, you would place your wrong sides together and sew them by hand, or you could place right sides together and crochet them together as an edge. What I'm going to do differently is I'm going to put them on what is the back piece like this, so they are wrong sides together. Let me just put the camera back again. The battery ran out. When I made the potholder squares, you end up with a final loop, and I have those at the top, which will be the shoulders. So I have the 2 front pieces placed wrong sides together with the back piece, and instead of hand sewing, I am going to stitch about 4 stitches worth on this end and on this end, and I'm basically attaching the 2 pieces front to back at the shoulders. Now what I'm going to do is use plain old kitchen wax paper as a stabilizer, and what that does is make it easier for the presser foot to go over the bulky fabric without catching on the loops. But because I have a loose loop on each piece, I have to make sure that that gets either caught in the stitching or stitched across so it doesn't come undone. So wrong sides together, and about the length of 4. When you finish a potholder, you end up with crochet stitch edging, and that's when you crochet it off the loom. So that's really 1 stitch, 2, 3, 4. So to the left of my thumb is how far I'm going to stitch across there, making sure that everything gets grabbed is basically what I'm doing. I'm kind of working with tight quarters here, so now either this machine or the Model 15, most any modern machine will go through this fabric, especially if you use either muslin or wax paper or interfacing, anything that will allow the feed dog to grab the bottom material but not have the loops get caught on the presser foot. Now I'm going to change it. I have it still on the zigzag, and I'm going to change it to straight stitch, and I'm going to try to go as close to the edge as I can. And I'm starting about 1/4 of an inch in, and I'll back up to get the edge there. You see how it still doesn't really want to move over the presser feet. I mean the feed dogs. And this usually happens at the beginning of a stitching line. And if it gets finicky like that, then a lot of times you have to move it forward and then back up it, like I said. So that's about as far as I want to go, but now I have to back up to the edge. Now this machine is still set at 20 stitches per inch, so that's the other thing that's coming in here, is that it's really putting a lot of stitches down. And sometimes it then pushes it through better. Now, if I were using the model 15 with a hand crank, I would have just a little bit more control over that. Not a lot, but a little bit. Whoops. So see, so that stitched it together at the shoulders. Now any woven square is going to shift a little bit. But there's one front to back at the shoulder. So you can see it takes a little bit of manipulation with the machine sometimes. But it's not really difficult. My neighbor has a new dog, a little Pomeranian named Stella. And Stella doesn't like to be at home alone. And she's barking and my dog is barking back. The woman couldn't resist the dog because she was named Stella. And she wanted the chance to go through the neighborhood yelling Stella. So now this one will be a little bit easier because I'm headed away from the initial edge. And there's more for the feed dogs to grab. And I'm going to back up a little bit just to make that doubly secure there. So now basically the front is sewn to the back, and you can just rip away the wax paper if it doesn't come away by itself. And there is the back sewn to the front. And the next step, I'll have to move the camera to show you how to go ahead and put the sleeves on. But again, it was in yesterday's video. Let me pause the camera and reposition it. Okay, this is a better view. Here's the front and the back, and the sleeves have to go on like this. So this is right sides facing up, and this I am going to pin, especially since weaving tends to shift. But what I'm going to do, I'll do each side at a time, and I'm going to lay in the square like that. I'll line up the other sleeve in a moment, and pin this along here, and then stitch it the way I just did, and that will be attaching the sleeve. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side. So there is the first sleeve attached, and again everything is facing right sides up, and I caught the loop. Here are the loops, and I made sure that they got stitched. And now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And then once this is right sides up, I have a knot in this one, so I want to make sure that I put it like this, line it up with the other one so that they're even, having my better side facing up, and then turn it over this way and stitch it in place. And there's my knot that I want on the wrong side. So I will stitch that, and after that what has to be done is just stitching the bottom of the sleeve edge and the front to the back at the sides, and I'll show you that in a moment. And there it is, and now it's just the finishing stitching, and this is all right sides up, so you want to make it inside out or right sides together, and you can suddenly see the shape of a sweater. Now I'll probably pin this as well. These are so cute, and they're made out of just 4 potholder squares. So it's so easy to make this for a 15-inch Bitty Baby doll by American Girl, all the way up to an 18-inch by American Girl. My first video yesterday showed the different dolls this will fit. So now the stitching goes along the bottom of the sleeve, and then from here down, and reinforce it all with back tack or reverse stitch, and then turn it right side out and put it on your favorite doll. But I'll go ahead and stitch it, and we'll see what it looks like when I'm done. Okay, and here it is, all stitched inside out. It's still inside out. Now I wanted to show you one of the purposes that I had for doing this was to try and get as narrow a seam as possible, seam allowance, and still hold it together. The edge loops are quite bulky. The red sweater that I made, I crocheted it together from the right side so that bulkiness was on the outside. What I'm really trying, I was going to whip stitch this one together, but then I wanted to find out how a 20 stitch per inch holds it together. From that aspect, it looks like it's going to be fine. I mean, that's not pulling apart at all. But what may have happened, I'm looking at this little cuff, and there's a little less give in this. And yesterday, getting this on the American Girl Kaya doll, her hand is like positioned open or wide, and her thumb kept getting stuck. Which, you know, that's no big deal. But if you have a huge seam allowance because of all this bulk, then that's going to make it more difficult. But putting this together like this with the machine has just been easy. It's been much easier than I thought. The fabric did not pull out of place. As far as, you know, it's a fairly loosely woven squares, and it didn't really stretch out of shape as I was doing this. So either method of hand sewing or machine sewing is fine with this sweater pattern, and it's such a simple little sweater to make. I'm just looking at under here. See, now that's like a loose loop or something right there, and yet it is stitched. So that's one thing that happens with woven fabric. But there it is, and what I think actually though is that this is going to be a little bit tighter on a Bitty Baby doll than the red one was. With the red one, the Bitty Baby doll, it was tightest on that doll and a little bit more loose on the other dolls. And because of this bulk being on the inside, I think this one is going to be tight as well. But I'll have to see. I'll have to go get the doll and put it on. But there's the sweater. It's a cute little sweater. And then I will take a piece of yarn and just put it through the two edges here. You could also put Velcro and a button or a ribbon through the whole neck. That would be cute. A ribbon through the whole neck. And the other thing is, if you ever see any loose loops, just run your machine over them to make sure that you don't lose any of the weaving. So let me go grab a doll and we'll see how it fits. Now it does fit. It is tighter. And that's why at the beginning of the video when I said that using fabric for your squares and cutting them 6.5 inches might be better for even for a Bitty Baby doll. This does fit her, and it's snug in a couple of places, and it depends on what they have on. She has a dress and a onesie on. The boy doll from yesterday's video with the red sweater had a onesie, a shirt, pants, so it depends on what else they have on. This does fit her. I'm probably going to leave this. Excuse me, I have allergies. I'm probably going to leave this on her. But I think this is why I was thinking, you know, if I cut fabric 6.5 inches, and I actually have a new presser foot that I bought for that machine that is a flower foot. So even you could take 2 layers of muslin and put flowers all over it and make a sweater like this. But this is with the Nellie Bee woven squares. And at this point, between crocheting the red one together yesterday and stitching this with machine today, I think probably the best way to stitch it together would be with a whip stitch so that you get the most fabric out of your square. But it does fit, so this is for a 15-inch American Girl Bitty Baby doll, and the 18-inch dolls, as you see Kaya there, are a little bit slimmer. So as long as you can get it over their hands, which shouldn't be a problem. It's not as small as I thought it looked. I mean, she's got plenty of room here. But that would be the only concern. So they're cute, they're fun to make. The next one I'll either make out of fabric, maybe with the flower foot, or if I make it with woven squares, I'll be whip stitching it together. But the machine worked fine on it, and 20 stitches per inch works fine. And the bonnet is in one of the other Nellie Bee Weaving Loom videos. You'll have to excuse my allergies. I've had the windows open all day, and like I said, I've had allergies. Both the dog and I get allergies. This is the fabric. At the end here I want to add this, that I spoke about at the beginning, and I can get 6 squares out of it, but the sidewalk chalk, probably because of the yarn this is, was not really showing up very well. So I used masking tape. And so what I would do with this one is on the inside of the tape, all around the edges, I would just stay stitch, even basting stitch, just to hold everything in place before I sew it together. And then because I was short on fabric, when I go to cut this, I have to remember that this is the edge that I was using right here, and not this edge up here. So, but you know, that happens all the time with patterns where you have to sometimes get every inch out of a fabric. And like up here, I have to place the grid lined up with this edge. So this square really goes over where the masking tape is. I'm not sure now if I'm going to do this because with this piece, because it came out a little bit more tight on her with the bulky seam allowance. I may come up with something different, you know, like a rag style sweater. I may sew it inside out and keep all that bulk on the outside. So this I'm going to set aside probably for a little while. But if this were, I have fabric, I just can't get to it right now. If this were my yellow gingham, and I cut out 4 squares of yellow gingham, I could make a gingham cardigan in a few minutes with just 4 squares. So there we are.